The Mirror Murders Part 1. Chapter 1. The First Shatter. Orpheus Residences, 47th floor. 3:12 a.m. The mirror was the only thing broken. Detective Caroline Blake stood just inside the doorway of the penthouse suite, the scent of chilled lavender oil and blood still lingering in the air. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting soft reflections along the sleek glass walls that lined the hallway, turning the space into an illusion of endless corridors. But the scene inside the bedroom was starkly real. The victim lay sprawled across ivory sheets, one arm dangling from the edge of the bed. No wounds, no sign of struggle, just a wide-eyed stare frozen in silent horror and the shattered remains of a floor-length mirror directly across from her. The glass lay in a perfect arc on the polished wood floor, as if broken from the inside out. No weapon, no prints, no forced entry. The door had been locked and latched from the inside. Caroline knelt beside the body. Victim is Delilah Morin, age 28, resident of Orpheus for 4 months. She murmured into her recorder. Time of death estimated between 2:45 and 3:10 a.m. No visible injuries. Paramedics confirm cardiac arrest. She didn't believe that for a second. The apartment building was a luxury marvel, 50 stories high, made of obsidian black glass, and every hallway lined in seamless mirror. It was designed by the now-deceased architectural prodigy Julian Calwin, who once claimed his buildings would reflect the human soul, whatever that meant. This case made it the third unexplained death in the Orpheus residences in less than 6 months. Each one behind a locked door. Each one with a mirror broken in the same deliberate arc. And each one with no living soul inside the room but the corpse. Detective Blake, a voice called softly. One of the responding officers hovered just beyond the mirrored threshold, as if reluctant to enter. No signs of entry or exit. Surveillance cameras show nothing between 2:30 and 3:15. Just static. Caroline stood, brushing her dark coat sleeve. "Where's the building manager?" "Downstairs." He said something about the security system resetting itself. She stared at the broken mirror, her reflection splintered into dozens of versions of herself. Some wide-eyed, some calm, all of them watching. "Get the footage. I want everything from the last 48 hours. And find out who she last spoke to." The officer hesitated. "Ma'am, she didn't make any calls. Her phone hasn't been touched since yesterday." Caroline looked at the phone still charging on the bedside table. Screen black. Notifications silent. She turned her eyes back to the glass. In one fractured shard, she could swear the reflection of the bed was empty. No body, just rumpled sheets. She blinked. Gone. A trick of light, maybe. But as she stepped closer, her heel crunched on something. A final sliver of glass. Sharp and delicate, like the edge of a whisper. She reached down and saw, scrawled faintly in reverse script along the edge of the frame. "Behind you." Her spine stiffened. She turned. Nothing. Only her reflection, and a hallway of mirrors stretching endlessly into the dark. Chapter 2. Hall of Echoes. Orpheus Residences, 47th floor corridor. 4:03 a.m. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel of glass illusions, carpet muffling footsteps, mirrors catching every twitch, every breath. Detective Caroline Blake moved slowly, her reflection multiplying around her in endless permutations. She could see herself from every angle, 1,000 versions watching silently as she passed. "Echoes," she muttered under her breath. Architectural narcissism at its worst, or perhaps at its most effective. The Orpheus residences weren't just designed to impress, they were designed to unsettle. Caroline ran her fingers along the mirror to her left. Cold. Seamless. It reflected nothing out of place, yet she swore it gave off the same hush as a church just before a funeral. The hallway had no cameras. At least, none visible. And the internal system hadn't just glitched, it had blacked out, leaving a gap of exactly 30 minutes. No motion triggers. No audio. As if the building itself had gone blind. And the only clue? A single cracked mirror. And that phrase, "behind you." She stopped in front of a unit 2 doors down. Apartment 4711. The woman across the hall had given a statement. Said she heard something strange around 3 in the morning. Not a scream. Not a thud. Just the sound of breathing. "Breathing," she said, coming from inside her mirror. Caroline knocked. After a pause, a middle-aged woman with anxious eyes opened the door just a crack. "Detective, Miss Fairchild, may I come in?" The woman hesitated, then unlatched the door. "Only for a minute." I'm still shaken. Her apartment was dimly lit, all the mirrors covered with black silk cloths. Even the screen of her television was turned away. Caroline noted a kitchen timer on the coffee table, ticking softly. Fairchild spoke quickly. "I couldn't sleep. I've been nervous since that last death, and with the storm earlier, well, I looked into the mirror in my hallway, just for a second, and I thought I saw someone behind me." Her voice trembled. "Not just anyone. Me." But I was smiling. Wide. Too wide. Caroline stayed silent. I turned around, and of course no one was there. But when I looked back, the smile was gone. Just my normal face again. Then I heard the breathing. From inside the glass. Slow and ragged. Like someone watching me. She wrung her hands. I locked myself in my bedroom. I didn't come out until the concierge knocked. Caroline paced slowly. "Have you had anything like this happen before?" "Only since moving in." "I know how that sounds. But Orpheus, it does things to you. The mirrors don't just reflect. Sometimes I think they remember." Caroline's eyes sharpened. "Remember what?" "I don't know. But sometimes, I swear I catch glimpses of things I never did. Places I've never been. Or me, doing things I never would." Back in the hallway, Caroline pulled out her notepad. She sketched a rough map of the 47th floor and the 3 rooms linked by the previous incidents. They formed a triangle, Delilah Morin's apartment being the final point. Each victim died alone. Each room locked. Each mirror broken in precisely the same way, from inside the frame, as if something pushed outward, trying to escape. She took a breath. Or someone. Her radio crackled. "Detective Blake." The voice of Officer Reyes came through. "You'll want to see this. Down in the security office. We recovered partial footage from last night." "I'm on my way," Caroline replied, already walking toward the elevator. But as she passed one of the hallway mirrors, she caught something strange. Her reflection. It wasn't walking. It was standing still, watching her go. And smiling. Chapter 3. A room with no view. Security Control Office, lobby level. 4:37 a.m. The security office was cramped, cold, and flooded with the sickly blue glow of half-functional monitors. Caroline Blake stepped inside and immediately felt the shift in air, less like a nerve center, more like a mausoleum of grainy screens and blank stares. 3 of the building's 7 cameras displayed frozen frames. 2 were filled with static. Only 2 remained functional, and even those were flickering intermittently, like a dying heartbeat trying to speak Morse code. Officer Reyes sat hunched at the console, eyes bloodshot and jaw tight. He didn't turn around. "They shouldn't have gone down," he muttered. "Not all at once. Not like this." Caroline set her coat aside. "Show me what you have." Reyes clicked through the feed with methodical precision. "This is apartment 4713, Delilah Morin's unit." The exterior hallway cam went dead at 2:44 a.m. "We have 15 seconds of recovered footage from earlier, timestamped 2:41. The screen crackled, then resolved into black and white surveillance of the hallway outside Morin's door. Empty. Still. Then, a flicker. Movement. A tall, indistinct silhouette passed in front of the camera. Reyes slowed it to quarter speed. "Look." Caroline leaned in. The figure, barely humanoid, moved with jerky, unnatural speed, as if stitched together from individual frames. No discernible face. No details. Just a smear of dark motion and the glint of light reflecting off what could have been a hand. Or a blade. "I checked access logs," Reyes added. Nobody entered her unit. No staff. No visitors. Her door stayed locked from the time she came home at 6:13 p.m. until we forced it open. Caroline watched the footage loop again. The silhouette didn't walk past the mirror mounted on the wall. It stepped out of it. "Run it again," she said, voice low. Reyes complied. It was subtle, easy to miss. But the mirror beside the elevator shimmered, just for a frame, as if something passed through it. "You see it too?" he asked. "Keep this backed up and secure. I want no one else touching that footage." She grabbed her coat. "I need to see the second victim's apartment." "The drowning." "Why?" "Because if mirrors are the common factor, then I want to know what happens when the victim isn't looking into one." The hallway here had no cameras. Just mirrors. Floor to ceiling. on every surface. Apartment 4602 had been the site of an apparent accidental drowning. A man named Lawrence Pike, 42, found submerged in his own bathtub 2 weeks ago. No trauma. No sign of drugs. The door had been locked from the inside. Caroline stood in his bathroom now, staring at the gleaming clawfoot tub. Empty. Silent. She moved slowly, inspecting the fixtures. Everything was state-of-the-art. Even the mirror, a wide, black-framed piece mounted above the double sinks, looked freshly cleaned. But there was a faint mark on the glass. Caroline leaned in. It was circular, about the size of a hand. Greasy, pale, like someone pressed their palm against it from the inside. She looked behind the mirror. Nothing. She turned on the light. The glow revealed something else. Faint scratches near the corner of the frame. Scratches that didn't look accidental. She ran her gloved fingers over the edge. There were words. Etched, barely visible, into the silver backing, "Don't look too long." Caroline returned to the lobby and requested the building's architectural blueprints. The manager, an aging man named Greaves, handed over a thick, water-damaged folder. "Place is a designer's fever dream," he muttered. Julian Cowan built Orpheus to be, what did he say? A reflection of reflection. Caroline flipped through the plans. Floor layouts. Elevator shafts. Utility lines. Nothing stood out, until she noticed the mirror installations. Each unit had one primary reflective wall, and every one was wired for something labeled NeuroSync mirror paneling. "What's this?" she asked, tapping the label. Greaves scratched his beard. "Some kind of prototype tech. Don't know much." Cowan insisted. Said it was part of the experience. Only 2 other buildings in the world ever used it. Both were shut down. She looked up sharply. Why? One for mold. He hesitated. The other for a suicide cluster. Back in the elevator, Caroline stared at her reflection in the polished chrome doors. She reached up, absently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her reflection didn't move. For half a second. Just long enough to notice. Then it caught up, perfectly synced again. She didn't flinch. But when the elevator opened on her floor, she no longer trusted her own face. Chapter 4, Silver Vale. Orpheus Residences, 47th floor. 6:02 a.m. Detective Caroline Blake stood in the center of Delilah Morin's apartment once more. But this time, she wasn't looking at the body. The body was gone, bagged and wheeled out with quiet ceremony an hour ago. What remained was something far more haunting. The mirror. It stood tall, 7 feet high and framed in brushed nickel, its cracked surface still catching slanted morning light like a web of silver threads. The break was spider-veined, but oddly precise, like the shattering had followed a pattern. Caroline had seen broken mirrors before: rage, panic, grief. They were chaotic. This one was designed. She stepped closer. Her reflection multiplied along the jagged lines. 20 fractured Carolines looked back, each with slightly different posture, expressions, angles of the head. One seemed to smirk. Another blinked too slowly. Another didn't blink at all. The room behind her in the reflection felt stiller than the one she was actually in. She checked her shoulder holster, more out of instinct than fear, and moved to the wall behind the mirror. She tapped the drywall. Hollow. She turned to Officer Reyes, who stood by the door with arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. "Give me a toolkit," she said. He hesitated. "You're going to take it off the wall?" "No," she said. "I'm going to see what's behind it." The mirror came off with surprising ease. Behind it was a recessed niche in the wall, lined not with wiring or insulation, but more reflective glass, tinted black and cool to the touch. It formed a sealed panel, slightly recessed. There were faint fingerprints on it. From the inside. "Jesus," Reyes muttered. Caroline said nothing. She leaned in and shone her penlight across the surface. Letters began to emerge, written in a cloudy smear. She watched herself die. Caroline exhaled slowly. "Seal this unit. No one enters without my clearance." As Reyes left to call it in, Caroline remained. The mirrors, they weren't just decor. They were active, watching, maybe even recording, though with what mechanism, she couldn't guess yet. She took one last look into the cracked mirror before she left the room. Only one reflection smiled back, and it wasn't hers. A battered clerk pushed a dusty crate across the counter. "Here's what we've got on the Orpheus project," he said, stifling a yawn. "Weird stuff. Half of this is from before the building permit was even finalized. Caroline opened the box and sifted through pages of sketches, electrical plans, internal memos. Then, tucked inside a red folder labeled Calwin/private, she found a series of notes in the architect's own hand. Her eyes narrowed. To trap the echo of a soul, one must first create an illusion of endless presence. Mirrors do not reflect what is, they reflect what was. The memory of a person lingers in the glass longer than we're willing to admit. It bleeds through. And beneath that, the silver veil must never be broken. Once the boundary fractures, the loop begins. Caroline flipped to the back of the folder. There, attached with a rusted paperclip, was a grainy black and white photograph. It showed the unfinished interior of Orpheus residences, hallways flooded with mirrored panels, exposed wires, workers mid-construction. And in the center of the photo stood Julian Calwin, the architect. He was staring into one of the hallway mirrors, and his reflection wasn't looking back. Caroline took her coffee black, leaning against the glass railing that overlooked the city. The building stood like a monument to silence and secrets, glittering with thousands of mirrored fragments. Each one a potential witness, or accomplice. She was being watched, not in the usual way, by reporters or suspects or eyes on the street. No, this was internal. Reflections lingered in her periphery. Familiar sounds had echoes that shouldn't have existed. Her own footsteps came half a second too late when mirrored, and when she walked past the mirrored elevator doors again. Her reflection turned to look at her before she turned her head. She no longer trusted surfaces, not in Orpheus, and certainly not in herself. Chapter 5, the 13th floor. Orpheus Residences, elevator shaft. 10:03 a.m. There's no 13th floor. That's what the concierge had said when Caroline Blake asked about the floor plan inconsistencies. He said it automatically, like a script he'd repeated to residents before. But there was a problem. There was space between floors 12 and 14. A narrow void in the blueprints. A dead zone in the elevator system. And Caroline had measured it herself, twice. Now she stood in the maintenance elevator, holding her breath as she manually keyed in the override code Reyes had managed to pull from an old systems manual. The screen blinked. 12. Error. 14. Manual input. 13. Warning. Unregistered level. A low mechanical groan echoed as the elevator shuddered, then began descending, slowly, as if through water. The numbers vanished from the display. The air grew colder. The elevator jerked to a halt. No bell. No light. No floor indicator. Just silence. And a narrow seam between the doors. The doors hissed open. What Caroline saw didn't belong to any modern luxury building. The hallway was unfinished. No carpet, no lighting fixtures, no polish. Just bare concrete walls and a single line of flickering overhead bulbs buzzing like flies. And mirrors. Dozens of them. Some still wrapped in plastic. Others already mounted. Tall, floor-length panels covered in dust. All unlit. All silent. And every single one reflected Caroline back with a delay. Half a second. Just enough to notice. Just enough to unnerve. She stepped cautiously into the corridor. Her footsteps echoed strangely, as though some bounced back and others didn't. Every door she passed was unmarked. Most were sealed shut, but one stood open. Room 1313. Inside was a small studio unit, unfinished like the hall. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, and one mirror already mounted on the far wall, positioned across from a lone chair in the center of the room. The mirror was black. Not just unlit, black. Like it absorbed the light entirely. A void. Caroline stepped closer. Her reflection didn't appear. She tapped the glass. It was cold. Too cold. Then she noticed something beneath it, etched faintly into the concrete, like a warning or a signature. Here, the veil thins. She crouched, traced the letters with her gloved finger. Behind her, the door creaked shut. Caroline stood quickly and turned. No one there. But in the mirror, the chair was no longer empty. There was a figure in it, sitting, perfectly still. Her heart thudded. She turned to look. The chair was empty. Back to the mirror. Still occupied. The figure slowly lifted its head. It was her. But not as she looked now. Her face was gaunt. Eyes ringed with darkness. Hair unkempt. skin slightly bruised around the neck like she'd been grabbed. Her reflection opened its mouth and whispered something, but there was no sound, just the faintest outline of words pressed against silence. "You're not supposed to be here." The lights above flickered. Caroline backed away. The figure stood in the mirror, and then it smiled. A crack shot across the black glass, lightning fast, and the lights went out. Her flashlight cut through the dark. The mirror was intact again. Empty. Caroline opened the door and stepped quickly back into the hall, her pulse still thundering in her ears. She didn't know what she had just seen, but something had seen her. She took one last glance back at room 1313. Then she pressed the call button. The elevator arrived without a sound. She didn't look at the reflection in the chrome doors as they closed, but she felt it watching her the entire way down. Chapter 6. The Mirror is Watching. Orpheus Residences, Caroline's temporary unit, 47th floor. 12:34 p.m. Detective Caroline Blake hadn't planned on sleeping in the building. But with 3 deaths, a sealed floor, and mirror systems designed by a dead man obsessed with memory, the city's chief of detectives had signed off on it. Stay in the Orpheus. Watch the residents. Make them talk. And if possible, catch whatever's hiding in the glass. She locked the door behind her and let the silence of her new temporary apartment settle over her. The Orpheus had a way of suffocating sound, walls too thick, corners too smooth. Even the air felt still, like it was being filtered through velvet. She stepped into the bedroom. There were 4 mirrors, one mounted on the closet door, one above the dresser. A full-length one leaned in the corner like it had been left there by accident. And the last, the worst, was directly across from the bed. She stared into it. Her reflection stared back. Perfectly normal. Unblinking. Still. She reached into her bag and pulled out a long strip of black fabric. One by one, she began covering the mirrors, draping them like they were corpses at a wake. She paused before the final one. The full-length mirror. She hadn't moved, but her reflection had. It had tilted its head, ever so slightly. Caroline froze, then blinked hard, and it was normal again. Her pulse raced in her throat. She covered the final mirror and stepped away, back rigid, hands trembling just enough to notice. Caroline couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of the sound. It was soft, subtle, like breathing. Not from outside, not from the hallway. From inside the mirror-covered closet door. She sat up slowly, listening. The sound stopped. Then she heard something else. Tap, tap, tap. Soft knocks, as if something were pressing gently against glass. Not trying to escape, just checking. She slid out of bed and crossed the room barefoot, careful not to let the floorboards creak. She stopped in front of the closet. The cloth over the mirror was perfectly still. No movement. But the tapping came again. This time, from behind her. She turned to face the mirror she'd covered across from the bed. The cloth had fallen off. She hadn't heard it drop. The mirror stood bare now, moonlight from the window casting faint silvery ripples across its surface. In it, she saw herself, lying in bed, sleeping. But she wasn't in the bed. She was standing, watching. The reflection blinked slowly, eyes opening in the sleeping version. And it smiled. Caroline stepped back. Then the reflection in the bed sat upright, in the mirror only. A crack appeared at the edge of the glass. Thin and hairline, like the first fracture of a bone under pressure. The mirror was watching her. She grabbed the bedsheet and threw it over the surface, heart hammering. No sound, no movement. But in the silence that followed, she realized something chilling. The mirror hadn't shown her future. It hadn't shown her past. It had shown her absence, as if she had already been replaced. Caroline sat at the dining table with her coffee untouched. Notes were spread before her, including the architect's writings, the floor schematics, the decrypted security footage, and her own sketches of the mirror fractures. Each death had been different in cause, but identical in placement. Each victim had at least one large mirror facing the bed, the bath, or the entryway. Each had experienced hallucinations in the days before their death, and each mirror had cracked outward, as though something inside had tried to escape. She marked the common threads with red ink. In every case, the mirror had been a witness, and now it had started observing her. No entry, no exit, but someone, or something, was moving between reflections. She could feel it, and worst of all, she was beginning to feel like she wasn't alone. even when she was. Chapter 7, Ghost Reflection. Orpheus Residences, 47th floor hallway. 7:12 a.m. Detective Caroline Blake stepped into the hallway like she was entering a church of glass. The mirrored walls reflected her from every angle, sharp, infinite, and just a little too slow to follow. There was no natural light here, only the cold white glow from ceiling panels, casting her reflection in ghostly hues. She could feel it again. The delay. Half a second. A heartbeat. A breath. It wasn't just unnerving, it was intentional. Orpheus wasn't a residence. It was a mechanism. A vessel for memory. A mirror house built to trap something that didn't want to be forgotten. And now it had her scent. Caroline knocked softly. A child had lived here. Lena Cartwright. Age 10. The only living witness. The door creaked open to reveal Lena's mother. Pale, sleepless, her eyes red with frustration and fear. She hasn't spoken since the other night, she whispered. Not a word. Just draws. And stares into the mirror when I'm not looking. Caroline stepped inside. The apartment was cluttered but lived in. Photographs on the walls, a kitchen timer ticking faintly, a pot of tea left cooling on the counter. Warmth trying to exist in a building that refused it. Lena sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, coloring silently. Caroline crouched down beside her. The girl glanced up, just once, and then quickly back to her paper. She was drawing a mirror. Inside it, a woman with black hair and hollow eyes, standing behind a child. Her hands were inside the mirror, reaching outward. Caroline's blood chilled. Lena, she said gently, did you see the lady in the mirror? The child hesitated, then nodded once. Caroline kept her voice soft. What did she do? Lena pointed at the reflection in her drawing, and then carefully scribbled over the child's face until it vanished beneath a black crayon cloud. Caroline noticed the detail. The woman in the mirror was wearing her coat. She rode the elevator to the lobby, her reflection flickering in the polished chrome doors. But something was wrong with the elevator's screen. Instead of the floor numbers, it simply displayed 13, 13, 13, 13. She jabbed the emergency stop and slammed her palm against the panel. The doors opened mid-floor, just above the 13th level. She could see the hallway through the gap, unfinished concrete, black mirrors, flickering bulbs, and standing at the far end, herself, but older, exhausted, blood on her hands. The figure turned its head, as if sensing her, and smiled. The elevator surged upward before she could react. Reyes looked half alive when she entered. There's something you need to hear, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. He played a file. Audio recovered from a tenant's smart speaker. Something recorded at 3:01 a.m. the night Delilah Morin died. It was faint, garbled. At first, just the hum of white noise. Then, breathing. Wet, ragged, panicked. Then a voice, barely audible, like a whisper inside the skull. It's behind the mirror. And then a sound that Caroline would never forget. The sound of glass cracking. She stood frozen, one hand against the desk. There was something inside the mirrors, and it wasn't bound by the laws of time, or sound, or light. It watched. It remembered. And maybe, just maybe, it reflected more than just faces. It reflected intentions, weaknesses, fears. She couldn't bring herself to turn the lights off. She removed the coverings from one mirror. Just one. She had to see. Had to know. She stared into it for 20 solid minutes. The longer she looked, the more her own face changed. Not in any dramatic way. Not melting or twisting like in horror films. No, it was subtler than that. Her face aged. Wrinkles at the eyes. A line between the brows. And then, her reflection started crying. Tears Caroline couldn't feel. Then the reflection reached for the gun on its hip. Caroline stepped back. Her reflection didn't. Instead, it pressed its palm slowly to the glass and whispered, lips moving in silence. Soon. Chapter 8. The Glass Architect. Julian Calwin's estate, Northwood Cemetery District. 10:42 a.m. The gates were rusted. The house beyond them wasn't just old, it was undisturbed. Vines crawled over marble columns. Windows sat veiled in dust like a mausoleum for light. The last known residence of Julian Calwin, the architect who built Orpheus, hadn't been entered since his death 2 years prior. Detective Caroline Blake stood before it with a court order in her pocket and something else in her chest. a whisper of dread. Because Julian Cowan hadn't just designed buildings. He had designed experiences, structures meant to feel, to react, to remember. And he had died inside one of his own creations. Alone, face turned toward the mirror. The air inside was stale, thick with dust, silence, and the scent of rotting wood and forgotten books. Caroline pushed through layers of shadow and sheets, stepping into a vast study lit only by slits of gray morning. In the center stood a tall mirror. Of course, it was propped against a fireplace, old, silver-framed, slightly warped with age. The fabric that had once covered it was crumpled on the floor, as if torn down in desperation. Caroline didn't look directly at it. Not yet. Instead, she moved to the desk. A stack of blue folders lay neatly arranged beside a long-forgotten coffee mug calcified with mold. Each folder was marked with a project title: Orpheus, the Silver Veil Series. Neurosync glass interfacing. She opened the top folder. Blueprints, not of walls or plumbing, of neurological wave patterns interacting with mirrors, scribbled in the margins in Cowan's hand. We don't see with our eyes, we interpret with memory. If the glass remembers, what chooses what it shows? Mirrors are not passive. They're patient. One page detailed a prototype for something called a cognitive reflection loop. Caroline read aloud. A mirror wired to respond to neural stimuli. Triggers based on emotional intensity. When fear is detected, loop activates. Mirror stores reaction, replays it, distorts it, enhances it. She set the page down slowly. They weren't just mirrors. They were psychological traps. And Orpheus wasn't the first. Caroline finally turned to face the tall mirror by the hearth. Her reflection stared back. Pale. Still. Waiting. But something was off. In the mirror's version of the room, the papers on the desk were scattered, the cup broken, the fireplace cold and unlit. But in reality, the fireplace held a faint ember. She turned around. The fireplace was empty. She looked back. The ember glowed in the mirror, growing. And then, in the corner of the mirror room, something moved. A man, standing half in shadow. His posture was broken, twisted as if his spine had been rearranged. And on his back, something was growing. A jagged, reflective growth rising from his shoulder like a shard of mirror. Caroline stared, breath locked. The man slowly turned his face toward her. Half of it was made of glass. Cracked, webbed, etched with memory. It was Julian Cowan, or what remained of him. He raised a trembling finger, pointed directly at her, and mouthed, "You're already in it." The reflection shattered. Caroline stumbled back, but the mirror in the real room never broke. It stood still, whole, silent, but her face in it now had his eyes. Caroline rushed to her car, hands trembling, throat dry. What she had seen wasn't a hallucination. It was recorded, reflected, stored and played back by a mirror that remembered its creator's final moments. She gripped the steering wheel. Orpheus wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by recorded madness, by loops of trauma, fear, and identity, fragments caught between glass and mind. And the more time she spent inside that building, the more she was being recorded too, replicated, distorted, and maybe replaced. Chapter 9: Surveillance and Shadows. Orpheus Residences, Security Control Office. 1:03 p.m. Detective Caroline Blake returned to the security office feeling as though her shadow had grown teeth. The air inside the small room was warm, humming with monitors and the bitter scent of burnt coffee. Officer Reyes looked up as she entered, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. "You're going to want to see this," he said without preamble. He tapped a key, and the central monitor flickered. Time-stamped footage loaded. 2:56 a.m., the night of Delilah Morin's death. "Same blackout window," Reyes muttered. "But I dug deeper. I found raw code buried in the mirror panel system. Loops, hidden layers. I think they're recording reflections." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "How?" "They're hooked into the building's motion sensors, light triggers, audio pickups, even facial recognition. Every mirror on each floor is part of a connected grid. A surveillance net," she said darkly. Reyes nodded. "But not just for the tenants. For whatever's inside." He pulled up a camera feed from the hallway outside Delilah's apartment. The screen was grainy, gray-toned. They watched. At first, nothing. Then, movement, barely perceptible. A shadow peeled itself from the wall, its shape shifting between frames. The hallway mirror shimmered, then blinked like an eye-catching light. The figure passed before the mirror. Its reflection didn't follow. It stayed behind, still, watching. Caroline felt the hair on her arms rise. "Pause," she said. Reyes froze the frame. The figure stood mid-hallway, faceless, featureless, its outline like a charcoal smudge. But in the mirror, her own face, looking directly into the camera. Caroline stepped closer to the screen. It wasn't an old reflection. It wasn't a recording. The eyes were following her now, tracking her as she moved. "Shut it off," she whispered. The screen went black. She needed to see where the wires led. If the mirrors were part of a system, there had to be a hub. Somewhere in Orpheus, the network converged. The building blueprints had shown a private maintenance corridor running along the spine of the tower, between floors. She and Reyes followed a narrow hatch behind the freight elevator, crawling through a metallic passage lit only by their flashlights. Cables pulsed overhead, data lines, power conduits. Then they reached a small steel door. Behind it, a junction box, labeled in black marker. Calwin prototype, do not touch. Caroline opened it slowly. Inside was a server bank, old, humming with quiet menace. Cables ran from it like veins. But the screens on the interface didn't show code. They showed reflections. A grid of eyes. Dozens of live feeds. Residents staring into mirrors. One screen showed a child standing silently in front of her closet mirror. Another showed a man brushing his teeth, but in the mirror, his eyes were bleeding. Another showed Caroline, right now, standing in the server room. Her reflection was behind her, smiling. She spun around. Nothing. But on the screen, it waved. Caroline sat alone, staring out at the foggy skyline. She couldn't shake the sensation. Not paranoia. Presence. The mirrors weren't just watching. They were feeding. Recording human reactions, looping them, replaying them, sometimes out of order. Distorting reality just enough to nudge belief. And whatever was doing it had a purpose. It was curating memory, constructing identity, creating ghosts from data. And now it had started mimicking her. Not just her face in the mirror, but her voice. Reyes had played her a new clip before she left. Audio recorded in apartment 4712 the previous night. It was Caroline's voice. "You shouldn't be here. You don't belong in your own skin." But she had never said those words. Not out loud. Only in her thoughts. She stood slowly. The sun dipped behind the skyline, painting Orpheus in gold and copper light. And across the glass walls of the lounge, her reflection multiplied again. But one of them, one just near the far end of the room, didn't move when she did. It stood still, head tilted, watching her, waiting. The case may be closed for now, but mysteries always leave behind new questions. If you enjoyed this investigation, leave a like. Every clue you find keeps the trail alive. Share your theories in the comments. Your mind might be sharper than you think. And subscribe to our channel Detective Mystery Stories, where every case hides a deeper secret, and every secret deserves to be uncovered. The next mystery is already waiting for you.